Welcome to Whisperer of Madness. If you're enjoying the story, consider liking the video and subscribing. It really helps grow the channel and this community. Eruption Tiff was muddle-headed as he prayed, but he'd already performed this ceremony of repentance in the past. Even if he stammered over his words, there were generally no mistakes. It can't be. We've found it. However, Tiff found that the aura in his surroundings had changed afterwards. The gazes gathered on him were like those of wolves, causing every hair on his body to stand on end in his nervousness. What's going on? Tiff raised his head, stunned. He immediately saw that the milky white lights from the altar had turned a demonic dark red. Foreign force! Tiff felt his neck being grasped, and his entire body was yanked into the air. The old bishop in front of him now looked incomparably sinister. He could faintly see his father wailing before he was struck to the ground. Now even the villagers isolated his family members, keeping away from them like they had the plague. No, once more, please try it once more. My Tiff definitely would not blaspheme against the goddess. The cries lingered in Tiff's ears, but the grasp on his neck was becoming increasingly tight, to the point that he was feeling suffocated. At this moment, the palm released its hold on him, and long-awaited fresh air poured into his windpipe. Tears and mucus flowed out of him. Say it, heretic! How did you go against the teachings of the goddess? The bishop's brows furrowed slightly at the sight of this heretic. This heretic's strength was much too weak, and was incomparable to the powerful blasphemers from before. Such a small threat would not have warranted the goddess descending and commanding them to act. Truth spell! A dot of golden light flew from the bishop's hands, disappearing into Tiff's forehead. Following which, Tiff found his mouth beginning to move involuntarily, answering all of the bishop's questions. Tiff's life had been very normal to the point that it was boring. When he was asked about the exploration earlier in the day, the bishop's breathing evidently became rougher. Quick, surround the kitchen at the back of this home. A tremendous force flew out, and Tiff felt like his body was floating high up in the clouds before falling into a gigantic iron hoop, making his whole body ache everywhere. With the escort of many soldiers, Tiff and his family members arrived in front of their house. Immediately after, waves of knights rushed forward as if meeting with some great enemy, finding a mottled iron sword. Lord Bishop, the leading knight respectfully offered up the sword with both hands. The powerful, sinister strength from the iron sword caused the bishop to frown. A demonic item or a temptation from the devils. Even appraisal techniques are useless on it. Though he had no idea what the characteristics of this item was, the bishop had already decided what would be his current target. If I purify this item, the favor and care I get from the goddess should be able to raise my ranking as a priest by a whole grade, right? The bishop's eyes showed how bewitched he was by this notion before he repented piously. O mighty spring water goddess, please forgive your servant for his greed. For some reason, there were no strange changes to the iron sword that Leyland's soul seed was reciting in. It docilely allowed the bishop to add all sorts of seals to it, and with numerous knights escorting it, they arrived at the altar in the village. This child's soul has already been polluted by the power of the foreign force. The bishop stood before the altar, stating his final judgment on Tiff. Burn him to death! Burn him to death! Burn him to death! Before Tiff could react, the many villagers began to howl maliciously. Such a zealous atmosphere and the large difference from what Tiff was used to seeing caused him to break out in tears. Even his family were bound by the infuriated villagers on wooden crosses that had been made on the spot. Tiff had a very bad feeling of what was going to happen. No, please forgive them. I did nothing. I only brought an iron sword back. I'm willing to repent for that. Tiff wailed and pleaded for the last time. For the goddess' sake, you can punish me, but please let my family off. The family of the heretic must also be purified. What answered him was the bishop's grave expression. Immediately after, amidst large amounts of flames and the cries of children, Tiff fainted in his fear. Mighty goddess, your servant piously invites you to descend. After burning Tiff's family at the stake, the bishop began to pray in front of the altar devoutly with his other sacrifices. As the chief offender, Tiff and that iron sword contaminated by evil needed to be personally dealt with by the goddess herself. Is this the path of faith? The soul seed in the iron sword was watching all that the bishop was doing, using religious ceremonies to spread fanatic behavior, while gathering the extreme emotions and soul force emanated from the followers. Leyland calmly analyzed. In his current state, he basically could not resist at all. Hence, he placed all his effort on gathering intel. Through this period of observation, the details on the surface of the world of gods were shown in front of him, clearer than Beelzebub's memories. First is the surroundings. Otherworldly power is limited to a very harsh degree. The regular beings here, with even the most common peasant, has a body that surpasses that of regular people in the Magus world by a huge degree, and even by several times. And then, we have the priests and knights here. Leyland could clearly sense the strength of another existence's laws from the priests. Though this path was very similar to Purgatory World's path of offerings, there were still differences. The chief difference was that the usage of the power of faith was very wide-ranging. Just the slight disturbance he had caused had allowed Leyland to see so many of these so-called priests. The number of people here were obviously gathered only from the surrounding regions. If power was to be poured into all of the priests there were, the many dignitaries of Purgatory World would go bankrupt, and yet it was a simple matter for the gods here. Furthermore, there were differences when compared with the trade of equivalent exchange of the path of offerings. The sacrificers here all thought themselves to be the servants of the gods and believed they had very low statuses. This situation aroused Leyland's interest, urging him to find out more. Furthermore, as there are too many, the gods can't focus on every single one of their followers, unless they are invited to do so, or if there are blasphemous souls. Leyland watched the bishop that began to pray, the feeling of an existence of laws descending beginning to tingle in the area. I need to do something. He made his decision, and then placed his focus on Tiff. Leyland, whose body was now but a broken sword, had no way to resist. He needed some sort of medium. Come to think of it, this guy was rather suitable. Blood and fire, and then there were the malicious smiles from the villagers, knights, and priest. This was what Tiff saw in his dreams. The heavy feeling of being suppressed was like a huge mountain, destroying this child's soul. In this situation, manipulating Tiff was just too easy for Leyland. Hey kid, do you want to take revenge? Many flames shot out all of a sudden, converging into a huge face that stared at Tiff. Of course, no matter what you are, whether a demon or devil, it's fine even if you want my soul. Please give me the strength to take revenge. Tiff began to weep in his dreams as he knelt. How astute, I like it. The flaming human face smiled evilly, turning into a gigantic blazing winged serpent that disappeared into Tiff's body. Remember. My godly name is Cuculcan, the feathered serpent Cuculcan. Your soul, flesh, and everything shall from here on belong to me. A voice sounded in Tiff's mind, and immediately after, he felt as if his body was lit with flames and felt like it was burning. What's going on? This kid's body is burning. The clamor around him caused Tiff to open his eyes once more, but the charred crosses not too far away only resulted in tears of disappointment. The boiling hot feeling did not dissipate as Tiff stared at his palm. This was no longer like a human. Strangely enough, there were scales with flames around, looking like a palm of vengeance that had come straight from hell. So, it wasn't a dream, Tiff mumbled. At this moment, the bishop and knights were startled by Tiff's appearance. From their point of view, he had suddenly been enveloped by a layer of fire, turning into some demonic thing that had come from hell. Kill him! Holy radiance flickered from the bodies of a few knights as they brandished their large swords and charged towards him. Ah! Tiff yelled, and the seals on the broken sword that Leyland had attached himself to crumbled, and then fell into his hands. Die! The broken sword slashed and created a few mysterious red streaks. Immediately after, the knights' bodies fissured, with blood and innards flying everywhere alongside the horrified cries of the villagers. As if there was a limitless amount of strength being poured into from the hilt of the broken sword, Tiff was like a death god as he reaped the lives of the surrounding knights. His life rays have gotten more powerful. He's at least comparable to a level 15 officer. Goddess Banks, how is this possible? Goddess, please bless us. The many knights and deity officials yelled in fury. However, Tiff cared nothing at all for things like this. His mind had already been filled with the thirst for revenge. One after another, the enemies were destroyed under his bloody red field of vision, which then focused on the bishop. Let's end this with a final experiment. Innate ability, devour. With Leyland's will, Tiff's arm grabbed onto the bishop's shoulders, following which his flesh began to melt at a visible rate. A call from Dreamscape, the goddess, will not let you off, the bishop said as he put up his final struggle. His face was filled with the fanatic expression of someone who had died for a good cause. Leyland simply did not give a hoot about all of this. Well, the transformation efficiency of his flesh is not bad. His divine force is also rather decent. Next up, the soul, the most important part. However, when the broken sword came into contact with the bishop's soul, the situation changed drastically. You actually have the cheek to profane my soul. The excruciating pain from somewhere deep within his soul made the bishop come to his senses. A mix of despair and resolution surfaced on his face. Almighty goddess, your devotee sincerely offers his own life and longs for your arrival. Divine art, deity's descent. The powerful counterattack made Tiff take many steps back in succession. The summoning ceremony that had been interrupted resumed, now moving very quickly. After all, the bishop had been working himself before, but now the goddess only needed to take the initiative to descend. Indeed, the soul of a devotee is a forbidden zone. Leyland gave a forced laugh and immediately sent a command to Tiff's brain, telling him to go far away and leave the iron sword with the soul seed behind. My power has almost been used up. Leaving now is useless, so I might as well contribute whatever strength I have left. The broken sword suddenly turned scarlet. Molten iron started to dissolve and finally formed the outline of a humongous devil. The badly damaged demonic wings, gigantic compound eyes, the devilish hand which had 6 fingers on it, and even the law of gluttony it grasped was all identical to the sovereign king of gluttony. After all, I also control Beelzebub's power of gluttony. Passing off as him will be far too easy. Leyland took control over the body of Devil and looked over at the bishop in front of him, just that he was now lifeless. Yet his body floated eerily in midair. A powerful conscient was being implanted in the bishop's body, filling him with some sort of divine sensation. Soon after, Leyland saw a pair of golden pupils. Now! Leyland did not dare to actually meet the other party face to face, or his flaws would definitely be seen. At the very moment when the spring water goddess descended, he suddenly manipulated the body of the devil to explode spontaneously. Boom, boom. The scorching flames, along with the power of laws, completely wiped this tiny village from existence. Even the residents in the neighboring towns could see the orange sky in the distance. In the entire Khan village, not a single soul survived except for Tiff. This incident was determined to be caused by the invasion of a devil. Through facilitation by the Spring Water Goddess Church, a new round of exercises took place across the entire central continent to root out heresies. Of course, all of this didn't have any relation to Leyland. Crash! The huge door of the astral gate disintegrated inch by inch. Leyland sat on the ground, his face as white as a sheet. Weakness spread across every part of his body. Ever since he had transformed into a law's being, such a feeling was already very rare. The world of gods is indeed incomparably powerful. A mere force that wouldn't even be able to support the soul for a day almost led to excessive depletion and endangered my origin. Leyland smiled bitterly. Moreover, this experiment has proven that any other force is extremely conspicuous in the world of gods. It simply cannot be concealed, and the consumption is way too high, which is disproportionate to the benefits. There was a profound look in Leyland's eyes. The suppression and hostility in the world of gods is something that even I am incapable of resisting against in my current state. In that case, it seems that the best method at present would be to walk the old path. After this experiment, Leyland had already made up his mind. In the world of gods, it was necessary to adopt a brand new format, which would be different from his former expeditions in the other worlds. I'll make my moves through an independently acting body, and he cannot receive any kind of power from the host body. Also, it's necessary for him to grow entirely based on the laws of the world of gods. Leyland stroked his chin. When he matures to a certain level, at least rank 7, then we can coordinate and work together to break through the crystal wall shackles. If we're going to do this, the trussel splitting technique that Melinda provided previously still needs to be improved on. Additionally, the method to maintain control over the body must be experimented as soon as possible. A multitude of ideas emerged from Leyland's mind and was arranged according to the level of importance. Only when all of this was complete and the experimental data fully recorded did Leyland then step into the outside world. Yes! Leyland shut his eyes and immediately knew of Sire's breakthrough using the sensing abilities of his bloodline origin. He's already advanced to rank 6. The limitless and everlasting power of Ouroboros seems to be highly compatible with Sire. Although his pace was slower than the eldest son Daniel, Leyland was extremely satisfied. Both of his children that branched out from his bloodline had grown healthily, and even had a strong grip on the other Warlock families in the Magus world. It was a pity that such lightning-speed advancements were only possible before these two bloodlines reached rank 6. When they attained the comprehension of laws, they would definitely meet with a bottleneck of greater difficulty. Leyland knew this as clear as day. However, Daniel and Sire haven't made any achievements in the comprehension of laws, and are currently only equivalent to newly promoted rank 6 magi. But with the additive effect of the bloodlines, their true combat abilities shouldn't be inferior to magi like the Flame Monarch. I'll be able to execute my plan with ease. Under the protection of the two rank 6 warlocks Daniel and Sire, the Ouroboros clan no longer feared clashing against others in most ordinary situations. The remaining beings of laws naturally wouldn't provoke them as well, out of respect for Leyland. After all, even the current Ouroboros clan was just like a child's plaything in their eyes. With such assurances, Leyland could finally let go of the Ouroboros clan completely and concentrate on his own matters. AI chip, show my current statistics, Leyland commanded. Leyland Farlier, rank 6 bloodline warlock, Targaryen rank 6, strength 185.64, agility 133.21, vitality 263.11, spirit 469.77, state of soul, peak of breaking dawn, comprehension of laws 99% engulfed. Host body has already been saturated with the original power of the Magus world and is unable to be raised further. The AI chip gathered and displayed Leyland's latest data. Indeed, the original power of the Magus world is now ineffective to me, unless I advance once more. Leyland's gaze seemed to shine brightly. Within the past 300 years or so, he had 3 opportunities to enter the underground world to absorb the original power of the world and the comprehension of laws. It was a pity that no matter how astonishing his combat abilities were, which were even level to average law beings, he had no way of changing the fact that he was still at rank 6. In comparison to the real laws beings, his current capacity was like a small cup, which had already been filled to the brim with the original power of the world. If he wanted to continue absorbing the original power of the world, the only path he could take would be to advance to rank 7. In fact, the rank 7 realm has already been completely laid out in front of me. I just need to get rid of Beelzebub and wrest control of the last bit of his power of laws. Leyland's eyes seemed to be ablaze with excitement. The repeated absorptions of origin power and comprehension of laws made him gain a greater understanding of the Magus path. It even allowed him to plan which direction to take in the future to a certain extent. All of this had to be realized in the world of the gods. Sire is requesting to communicate with me. Is it about the secret snake den? Forget it. I'll let him take full responsibility for it. He doesn't have to report to me. Leyland then spent the next few moments casually dealing with the work that he had accumulated. The secret snake den was in actual fact a pocket dimension that Leyland had constructed himself. It mimicked the same method that the snake dowager had used for the Serpentes Plains, and many different highly skilled snake species were bred there. Among them, it was only natural that the Chemian serpent descendants were the most common. The bloodlines of the alabaster devil snake and the 3-headed python, as well as a small amount of the Targaryen bloodlines, also circulated among the snakes. Through gradually reproducing over a long period of time, the secret snake den had turned into a paradise for highly skilled snake species. A few variations had also appeared in some specimens. Of course, this was still a far cry from the standard that Leyland expected. However, that didn't matter. With his current life expectancy, he absolutely had the patience to continue waiting. Although the probability of success of such experiments in variation is almost insignificant, it's still a glimmer of hope. My financial ability and physical resources are also sufficient for this experiment to carry on without taking the cost of production into account. Leyland supported his chin with his left hand and suddenly lifted his eyebrows. Is this feeling a calling from the dreamscape? The familiar sense of a bloodline caused a strange smile to creep onto the corners of Leyland's lips. After receiving the bloodline of the alabaster devil snake, his understanding of dreamscape was already so deep that he had even obtained the ability to travel there directly. His advancement to the halfway point of rank 7, as well as his comprehension of laws, strengthened this ability significantly. It could be said that the current dreamscape was no longer some kind of backyard garden to Leyland, but a home ground that he was extremely familiar with. Just moments ago, Leyland had sensed a call from Dreamscape, and the source was actually the Snake Dowager. Ever since suffering a major loss at Leyland's hands when he had been promoted, the Snake Dowager hadn't appeared, making Leyland feel rather regretful. He had looked forward to fighting her in the Magus world. Judging by the powerful and oppressing strength there, the Snake Dowager definitely wouldn't be able to return home. Evidently, she wasn't a fool and didn't let Leyland fulfill his wish. Leyland had also been tactful enough to hole himself up inside the Magus world and didn't give any purgatory exemplaries a chance, thus they could only fume with rage between gritted teeth. The dreamscape? How interesting. Negotiation in the infinite astral plane, the Magus world and the world of gods were like the two ends of an hourglass. They were both extremely formidable, yet there were numerous smaller worlds in between them. Among these worlds were large-scale worlds such as the Purgatory world, Icy world, and the Shadow world. Although they couldn't be compared to the big two, these worlds were still plentiful in origin force. Dreamscape, however, was even more marvelous. It didn't have a fixed form, yet it spanned across many worlds, as though it was everywhere at once. At its peak, Dreamforce was comparable to the energy of the Magus world. However, this strange yet terrifying world was now at its lowest point because of how weak Dreamforce was right now. This characteristic of Dreamscape was evidently exploited by numerous beings. They used it as a bridge for communication and interaction. This was especially so for the Snake Dowager, who had mastered Dreamforce. "Since it's an invitation, I'll go." Leyland smiled and suddenly disappeared from his laboratory. He was confident in Dreamforce himself, and although he couldn't defeat the Snake Dowager in his current state, he was strong enough to buy himself the time to escape Dreamscape. With such a premise, it was naturally impossible for the Snake Dowager having come to attack him. She likely wanted to make peace. After all, no matter how unwilling the Snake Dowager was, Leyland had already broken free of his bloodline shackles and had even advanced to become the primogenitor of a new bloodline. This was an undeniable fact. The Snake Dowager had the ability to live for countless years, and she had even successfully survived the final ancient war. It was impossible that she was still unable to accept this reality. A scarlet flame flickered as a huge door appeared on the plane, and Leyland's figure emerged from the door frame. "Is this still Dreamscape?" Leyland raised his eyes and gazed into the distance. What he saw was all withered trees and dried-up streams and lakes. The entire world seemed to be an arid wasteland, and there wasn't even a trace of life. Although he long knew that the entirety of Dreamscape had also entered a dreary phase in the wake of the value of Dreamforce dropping, such a situation surprised Leyland. "By the looks of it, I'm afraid that perhaps the entire Dreamscape has fallen in the hands of death." Leyland frowned slightly. He recalled the time when he was still at rank 5, and all the aboriginals he had come across in Dreamscape. I wonder what happened to little Jillian and their community. I'm afraid that things probably didn't end well for them. The Dreamscape aboriginals that Leyland had met previously were from the most lowly community in Dreamscape. Even though he had imparted his teachings to them previously, it probably only gave them a little more power to defend themselves. In the face of the master that was natural disaster, this tiny bit of power was like an ant, the difference being that it was just slightly bigger. The deterioration of Dreamforce was something that even those lords that could cause calamities had to defend against. Judging by Jillian's community's capabilities, it was likely that they were unable to survive. However, seeing how Dreamscape can be so strange and beyond belief, it's not that Jillian's community didn't have any hope of surviving at all, just that such a possibility is so small that it's practically negligible enough to be disregarded. Leyland shook his head and didn't think further. The degradation of the world exemplifies the fundamental truth of the astral plane. Even if I am a being of laws, I cannot escape from my final destiny, which is to perish. Forefather of Targaryen, what do you think? The surrounding land turned into nothingness, and the entire wasteland seemed to have transformed into a boundless sky in an instant. A ball of snakes appeared like a star, and the heads of numerous giant snakes hissed angrily, revealing the Snake Dowager's charming face. It's precisely why it's able to excite me and vow to pursue eternity and to transcend worldliness, and I will abide by this even till death. O Snake Dowager, if you're of this level, you don't have to put up an act in front of me." Leyland laughed gently and took a step forward with his boot. Snap, snap. Jet black cracks started to appear in the starry sky and made horrifyingly loud sounds. Shortly after, many of smaller cracks started to extend like a spider web. Numerous spatial storms rippled across the surface, and the entire sky shattered under Leyland's feet. The surrounding environment reverted into the original dreamscape. The Snake Dowager looked on as Leyland trampled the sky into smithereens. Her beautiful eyes shone with a profound radiance, and it was a good while before she spoke slowly. "Leyland, your current strength is worthy enough for me to meet you head-on." Her voice had an inexplicable charm to it. Of course, the Snake Dowager was expressing her natural bloodline abilities, which had long lost its effect on Leyland. The premise of a relationship is to have equal strength. Leyland had already understood this principle earlier, thus his facial expression did not change. He then asked unhurriedly, "I don't think you invited me here to discuss this issue, right?" "Yes." The Snake Dowager's voice was melodious. "To have a being like you among my descendants is my luck and also my misfortune. But since the bloodline origin has already been taken from me, it will be of no use to be entangled with you. So it seems that you have a method to resolve this." Leyland was evidently ridiculing her, but the Snake Dowager didn't seem to feel it. "As long as you assist me in seizing the shadow world, I can write off all the previous incidents in one stroke, and even help you to become the other origin of the 10,000 snakes. Together, we can share the power of the shadow world." The Snake Dowager bit her lip, as though she was making a huge sacrifice. Such a lovely and pitiful posture would make any male creature go crazy. Leyland, however, was not enchanted by her graceful bearing. Instead, he was astonished at how fearless the Snake Dowager was. "Seize the shadow world. Mighty Snake Dowager, you have such an enormous appetite." Leyland drew in a deep breath, and at the same time also recalled an intelligence report regarding the Snake Dowager. "But that's right. You initially made use of shadow force to cultivate your own laws and form paths of laws, hence you would covet the shadow world more than anyone else. You tried to capture the entire shadow world in the ancient times, but unfortunately, you failed. The path taken by rank 8 beings was to exploit some kind of medium, continuously refine their own laws, and form a path that was exclusive to them only. If one was able to achieve this, they would reach the peak of rank 8. They would be able to spy on beings in the rank 9 realm, such as the Mother Core, for instance. The Snake Dowager's previous attempt failed, thus she had no choice but to migrate out of the shadow world along with her descendants, and arrived at the purgatory world. But the origin of the shadow world was crucial for the Snake Dowager to achieve the peak of rank 8, therefore she couldn't give it up. Consequently, it was highly normal for her to launch an offensive once more. What Leyland didn't see coming was that her actually approaching him for assistance. "Aid you in seizing the shadow world? I'm afraid I'm impotent." Leyland understood the level of the shadow world thoroughly. It was a powerful world, much like the purgatory world, and possessed numerous law beings. In other words, if he was on the same camp as the Snake Dowager, he would have to take on many other law beings one-on-one. Leyland even strongly suspected that there was an extreme being similar to the Mother Core within the shadow world. Otherwise, the Snake Dowager's plans wouldn't have been thwarted. In such a situation, wouldn't it be suicide to form an alliance with the Snake Dowager? In reality, there aren't as many law beings in the shadow world as you think. Besides, you inherited my bloodline. The same additive effect applies to your strength in the shadow world as well. The assistance that the shadow origin will provide you with will definitely go beyond what you imagined. The Snake Dowager evidently knew Leyland's considerations. For beings like them who had reached this level, most of her crafty conspiracies had already lost their effect. The only effective way was to tempt him directly with benefits. Does the Snake Dowager actually have so much confidence in seizing control over the shadow world? Leyland couldn't help but ask this question directly upon seeing her self-confidence. "I almost succeeded the previous time. All I lacked was an assistant of the same origin." The Snake Dowager shot Leyland a profound look, yet it made his scalp go slightly numb. "An assistant of the same origin? Makes sense. We are, in fact, beings of the same bloodline origin. Even our powers can work in harmony and complement each other." If she really missed by only a hair previously, then coupled with my powers, perhaps. Leyland's pupils twinkled as he quickly analyzed the situation. Of course, no matter how the snake dowager made it sound like a deluge of heavenly flowers, he wouldn't fall for her trap. Just a vague and insubstantial agreement that she would write off all their previous grudges in one stroke, coupled with a promise that they would share the profits together, and she wanted him to sacrifice his life for someone else. What kind of joke was this? What was more dangerous was that he was still a semi-rank 7. If they were in the Magus world, even if the snake dowager came down personally, he was confident of making sure that she would land herself in serious trouble. But if they were to fight for the controlling rights of the shadow world, it was inevitable that he would have to make the trip using his actual self and descend within the shadow world. Since it was a foreign world, and also the snake dowager's home ground, Leyland wasn't foolish enough to deliver himself up straight into her mouth for free. In all likelihood, the snake dowager might gobble him up straight away even if she couldn't capture the shadow world to properly make up for it. My apologies, I'm still incompetent when it comes to matters like these. After much consideration, Leyland immediately rejected her without hesitation. The moment the words left his lips, he could feel the surrounding space come to a standstill. The snake dowager's beautiful pupils nearly became as narrow as a straight line, as a horrifying sensation dissipated from the ball of snakes. Leyland, however, was not fearful. The gigantic Targaryen phantom appeared behind him and started hissing at the snake dowager in anger. Large amounts of bloodline energy seemed to begin to grow restless, and was about to fly out from the snake dowager's body. Having already extricated himself from her control over his bloodline, not only was Leyland no longer under the snake dowager's control at all, but his body even had an odd restraining ability towards her. No matter how mystical this force was, it still didn't have any effect in the face of such a tremendous difference in terms of strength. But there was absolutely no problem for Leyland to break away from the dreamscape during this short amount of time. And the snake dowager could only grudgingly choose to reach a compromise upon seeing this. One-eyed dragon, my descendant, the Targaryen emperor, you may put forward another request. The snake dowager's voice had a hint of helplessness. Her eyebrows, which were slightly knitted, were especially heartbreaking to see. The power of this charm she uses incessantly is really... Leyland smiled wryly to himself. Her seductive powers were produced naturally, just like the aura of warlocks, and had extremely high potential. However, the snake dowager's position also made him fall into a state of contemplation. She seemed really sincere right now, but if his own safety couldn't be guaranteed, Leyland definitely wouldn't partake in this plan. If he could actually form an alliance with the snake dowager and form friend from foe, it would be of great help. After all, he had only truly offended very few beings of laws, and they were Beelzebub, the snake dowager, and the nefarious filthbird. Amongst them, Beelzebub was already thoroughly done for, and he could only wait for Leyland to wrap up the loose ends. If the snake dowager turned from foe to friend, then the Trial's Eye would definitely do the same as an ally. The number of the people in his opposing camp would immediately be reduced by more than half, which would in turn significantly lower the pressure Leyland was facing. Maybe by then, he wouldn't have to continuing holding himself up in the Magus world, and could instead travel with a peace of mind. Leyland pondered for a moment before speaking. Well, your conditions piqued my interest, but I do have a request. Please speak your mind. It seemed that the snake dowager really did view Leyland as someone of equal rank. Firstly, I must truly advance to rank 7 before I will agree to embark on this project. Furthermore, I also want... Leyland listed the requirements that he had already thought of. Wait for you to advance to rank 7. The snake dowager's gaze swept across Leyland. The laws of gluttony that you are in control of is considered an exceptionally outstanding ability even among other rank 7 beings. I'm afraid that it would require a lengthy amount of time to fill in its gaps completely. As for your other request, the snake dowager also started to mutter to herself. You will not have to worry about my advancement. I'll definitely be able to fully comprehend the laws of gluttony within at least 1,000 years. The other request is my bottom line. If you are unable to agree to it, then I can only express my regret. Leyland wasn't willing to give in by even an inch. Will do. It was a long time before the snake dowager spoke. In addition, we will have to agree to and sign a bloodline contract with the dreamscape as our witness. After a short while, the gigantic ball of snakes gradually vanished from the starry sky, and the surrounding environment had been restored to its deathly still state. Leyland stood in the middle of the wilderness, seemingly having a penny for his thoughts. The snake dowager agreed to such a condition, and even signed a contract. Seems like she really is sincere about it. Moreover, my strength at that time must have undergone an earth-shattering change. I wasn't even afraid that she would fall out with me. Leyland wasn't a battle maniac, of course. If he could reduce his enemies as much as possible on the premise of protecting his own interests, it was certainly a good thing. Besides, this contract also allowed Leyland to win over at least 1,000 years of peace for his development, which was essential. Is this the way the beings of law communicate? Compromises are necessary because it's highly challenging to exterminate one another. Also, the ones who have greater strength frequently have the upper hand, yet the interests of the weaker ones are also protected. After today's incident, Leyland had once again gained an even deeper understanding of the way law beings behaved. However, assisting the Snake Dowager in fighting for control over the Shadow World was not an easy task. Fortunately, the contract did not stipulate that they had to begin right away, and instead gave Leyland a long period of time to prepare. After all, 1,000 years hadn't even passed since his birth. Yet, he had already attained what other magi could only dream of achieving all their life, which was to master the laws. If given another millennium, to what extent would he grow to by then? Even Leyland himself couldn't help but anticipate it. Since I'm in Dreamscape, I might as well visit Jillian and the others. After being carried away by a whim, Leyland suddenly had an idea. Highly ranked magi frequently had the mysterious ability to make prophecies. They could even sense future episodes that would be detrimental to them, and in addition, evade them. More often than not, the result would be that the more one didn't want something to happen, the more likely things would spiral down a worse track. Leyland's sudden thought about Jillian and the others was also classified as the same kind of prediction. This would also imply that perhaps Jillian and the rest were not completely wiped out, but are still living in some corner of Dreamscape. And does this even mean that they would be of some help to me in future? Leyland stroked his chin as his lips curved into a smile. Soon after, he transformed into a long blood-red streak that disappeared into the horizon. Time and space were distorted in Dreamscape, thus it was very inconvenient to travel. The same applied even to beings of law like Leyland. However, there were also advantages of Dreamscape sinking into stillness. At the very least, the other evil spirits in the Dreamscape had also fallen into a slumber, and a majority of those bizarre scenes seemed to have disappeared, which allowed Leyland to avoid a lot of trouble. Those evil spirits were beings of law as well, and they could have been a huge inconvenience to Leyland otherwise. Once he was drawn into the strangest kind of space-time settings of Dreamscape, he might even die in his current state. If not for the degeneration of Dreamforce, Leyland might not dare to swagger along as he explored the place, not even if he was braver by 10,000-fold. The place where Jillian and the rest have gathered is not far away from my previous laboratory. Due to the previous failure of his space-time experiment and the spatial alignment, Leyland's laboratory had strangely become a place which was linked to Dreamscape. Leyland seized the opportunity, of course. Not only did he gather vast amounts of precious data and Dreamscape materials, he had also made some arrangements near his laboratory. Now, he was attempting to find the place that he had traveled to from his previous laboratory by tracking the signal that he had deployed beforehand. A red radiance twinkled in Leyland's eyes while he hovered in midair. He seemed to have transformed into an afterimage as he chased the faintly discernible traces of connection, constantly changing the direction he headed towards. As he made his way there were multiple times when Leyland could sense beings of the same rank as him. Here, the whole sky turned pale in an area that was being destroyed by endless snowfall. There was bound to be a demonic being that was fast asleep in the heart of the area. Leyland certainly did not dare venture to infringe on its territory, and could only decide to make a detour, which was a longer route. The limitations of the AI chip's scan, coupled with his abilities, allowed Leyland to only see a vast stretch of sparkling and translucent crystals in the middle of the snow. It seemed like an extremely powerful seal. Did the evil spirit choose to seal itself up, or was it arranged by the Dreamscape? If it's the latter, then these evil spirits are in such a miserable plight. Leyland shook his head. After passing a few territories that belonged to the evil spirits, He could sense that he was drawing near to the signal that he had deployed at that time. Ha! Leyland's facial expression changed in an instant. The solidified soul force allowed him to sense a tremendous aura ahead of him. What astonished him even more was that the owner of this aura actually had the strength of a rank 7 Magus as well. Moreover, it didn't seem to have the slightest intention of sealing itself up or entering a deep slumber. Rumble. The earth split open, revealing an enormous yellow eyeball, and followed by a thorny back that resembled a hill. A pair of gigantic fleshy wings spread open across the land, and even blocked the entire sky from view. Ho-ho! An enormous one-eyed dragon suddenly burrowed its way out from the ground. Its body was like a diamond, sparkling with brilliant lights and vibrant colors. Its huge eyes were fixated on Leyland, and it emitted an immensely powerful draconic aura, making the surrounding air come to a standstill. "Welcome, young Magus." It spoke in the ancient Byronic language, which pleasantly surprised Leyland. "May I ask if you're from Dreamscape? Also, have you seen other magi here before?" "Oh ho-ho. I once witnessed the ancient glory of magi with my own eyes and have experienced the destruction from the ancient battle. I exist in the past, the present, and will inevitably extend to the future." There was evidently an issue with this dragon's brain, or perhaps its line of thought was far too complicated, which gave Leyland the urge to roll his eyes. Fortunately, the one-eyed dragon finally regained its senses after a round of self-praise. "An aboriginal of Dreamscape? No, I'm certainly not. The almighty Gigakel dragon race only comes from the Ultron world. In fact, during the period of Dreamscape's deterioration, many beings were fond of coming here to travel and try to pick up scraps. Just 200 years ago, I met a master on his travels. He had found a damaged Destiny tarot card, but unfortunately he was immediately hunted down and killed by an evil spirit whose seal had been lifted. Although this one-eyed dragon was very narcissistic, Leyland managed to obtain some useful information. According to its statement, majority of the strange scenes in Dreamscape had vanished as numerous evil spirits had fallen into a deep slumber during the deterioration of Dreamforce. Thus, it had become a paradise for explorers. This place was not lacking in beings of law as well. Presently, the Dreamscape certainly no longer had anything good to offer. Even if it had, it would be on territories where the most evil spirits lived. In order to get their hands on them, one would have to run the risk of getting hunted down and killed by those evil spirits. If they were fatally attacked, no matter how much they dreaded consuming their power, these enraged spirits would still jump out of their sleep to kill. Heh heh! Those fools. The stagnation of Dreamforce has immersed the most precious of treasures into the world's core. What other profitable items would still be left on the surface? Oops, this is terrible. I let it slip by accident. The humongous one-eyed dragon covered its mouth with its claw. "Goodbye, Magus." The enormous one-eyed dragon once again made its way underground like a groundhog. Leyland almost burst out laughing at its nimble and practiced movements. Imagine, so the original place has now fallen to this barren state. After bidding the one-eyed dragon farewell, Leyland finally arrived at the area where he had last left his signal. However, this terrain had obviously changed compared to when his laboratory had originally connected to this place. The many forests had all disappeared, and the bumpy terrain gave rise to feelings of familiarity. The former location of the lab had long since been swallowed up by seawater, and the rank 6 spider he'd met before had also vanished without a trace. Where are Jillian and the rest? Based on the map saved by the AI chip in his memories, Leyland found no difficulty in finding the place they had gathered in, though it was now completely empty. The pots and metal on the ground looked completely corroded. To this extent, Leyland picked up an iron sword. This was something he had gifted them, made from the best steel and forging techniques of the central continent. Now, however, it was turning to powder in his hands, corroding inch by inch before disappearing entirely. It's only been 3 centuries, but from the items it seems like they've gone through thousands or even tens of thousands of years. Is this a change from Dreamforce when it was still very active? Leyland stroked his chin, arriving at where Jillian and her father had resided. Or rather, this was only the remains of what had been. The old house had long since withered away, and there were only slight traces left on the ground. The settling of time should show the truth before me. Leyland's eyes looked profound as he said words that were like an incantation. As beings of law, Magi had already surpassed things like incantations and spell formations. They touched on the most fundamental powers of magic and had the power of the magic take effect as words were spoken. Rustle. The soil separated and the rocks caved in, revealing a few broken bones and even some corroded household utensils. Seems like after I left, Jillian lived for a long time. As time was turned back, Leyland gained a deep understanding of what had happened in this area. BZZT, BZZT. At this moment, the ground had caved into to the limit, and a black bundle of light with some tattered cloths within appeared. Atop the tattered cloth were a few badly damaged markings that could not be recognizable. Isn't it the notebook I gave to Jillian? Leyland's eyes shone. From the AI chip's analysis of the image, these items that were like cloth were actually multiple pieces of paper stuck together, a strange situation, a result of being pushed down with tremendous force. Reveal! Leyland reached out and touched them. Soon enough, lines of tiny words were projected, emitting multicolored luster in the air. The AI chip quickly accepted this information and arranged this information based on the time they had been made. It is a good day. Father and the rest made use of the method Uncle left behind and trained many outstanding clansmen. We accepted other tribes, and our community is constantly expanding. It's just that Uncle has yet to return, and Jillian is very worried. At the beginning, there were only daily happenings recorded in the notebook. After gaining Leyland's support and help, Jillian's tribe expanded very quickly, following which, from between the lines, Leyland could sense a strong sense of fear. First is a famine, and then the plague. Has this area been cursed by the Master of Calamities? Do we have to give this place up? Father is very bewildered. All the explorers he has sent out have not come back with information on good places to move to, as if the world has suddenly been struck with famine. The begin of the wane. And this time, this is before the weakening of Dreamforce. Leyland's eyes flashed, after which the writing on the notebook became a mess. It seemed like its owner had not spent much effort on recording this. There were merely few words here and there, all representing death and despair. In this period of time, many clansmen have experienced changes to their bodies. They first become mysteriously stronger, but at the same time, they seem to lose their rationality with the gaining of strength. In order to suppress them, there have been many casualties on our best. Gods, I hope I won't end up like them. This passage was full of terror, and Leyland read through a few times with interest. All crops have vanished. We need to abandon this place. No matter how serious the calamity in the north is, it's still better than our base now. I will leave this notebook behind in hopes of someone finding it. Hopefully it'll be Uncle. On the very large page, the words were all written messily, and it was obvious she had been in a hurry. Famine, plague, war, and then destruction. Leyland recalled the content in the notebook. It seemed that the camp here had long since moved, and there had been a strange transformation that happened to the batch of natives with Jillian. They became mysteriously stronger, and most lost their rationality. Is it an effect of Dreamforce doing this of its own accord? I never thought they'd be so unlucky. Dreamscape was full of mystery. What might be a little worm might turn into a devil the very next day. Before the wane of Dreamforce, such a change would be very severe, and those natives had evidently profited. If not in such a cruel environment, they might not even live to be able to move away. I wonder how they turned out in the end. Leyland stroked his chin. If Jillian and the rest had grown in strength, that would be beneficial to him too. But the calamity in the north, Leyland forced a smile. He'd obviously already checked that direction, but that was only filled with the domains of devils. Even at his most powerful, he wouldn't dare intrude. The clues from the natives could only be given up on at this point. These aren't the main point anyway. It's good if it works out, but there aren't any losses even if I fail here. Leyland consoled himself. Since the seeds have been planted, next is to wait for Dreamscape to completely wane, and I'll then wait to see what hat I can harvest. Taking another look at this area, Leyland's figure became increasingly translucent until he disappeared. Pila. After he left, the remains of the notebook from before was completely eroded, turning into fragments that flew in the winds. Dark red luster shone once more, and once everything was over, Leyland was back in his laboratory in the Magus world. The silent dreamscape is not only a bridge of communication amongst various beings, but also a paradise for adventurers. The natives have all disappeared, though. What an interesting change. Leyland sank into deep thought and then pressed on a circular, twisted rune. Ignox, it's Leyland. How's it going with the thing I previously asked you about? Distorted rings of light emitted silver luster in the air. Minutes later, Leyland heard the unique voice that belonged to Ignox transmitted from it. Crackle. My apologies. The signal isn't all that good here. As for the method you mentioned about wanting to increase the ability control your Trussel clone, I've already found it in the library. Shall we go through with the trade now? Of course, Leyland exclaimed, surprised. He then saw a shriveled palm grab a black, dried-up apple and extending from the distorted circle. This method of spatial transmission is slightly terrifying. Restraining himself from rolling his eyes, Leyland took the apple from the hand with a layer of fur on it. Beep, discovered Soul Force data interface. Permit transmission. The moment he had the dried-up apple in his hands, Leyland immediately noticed something had changed. At this moment, the sound from the AI chip's prompt was heard. Yes! With Leyland's order, a string of information flashed into his eyes. This was the method to resolve the problems that came with controlling Trussel clones. While he had yet to test it out, Leyland could generally ascertain the authenticity of the information. Good. That's exactly what I needed. The item I agreed to give you before will be sent to you soon. Leyland nodded in his satisfaction. It's great that it's useful to you. Honestly speaking, though, I don't recommend you go through with this. It's too dangerous. From the other side came Ignox's kind warning. After thanking him for his kind intentions, Leyland closed off the communications. If this were just a simple exploration of worlds, I wouldn't want to do this, but... Based on the information Ignox gave, Leyland looked grim. Though most of the preparations were done, it was not that easy to be resolute and go through with it. Yes, his preparations were all for the world of gods. The crystal wall of this world was far too obstinate, and it was an unsolvable issue for even other existences of laws. Leyland had the Manderhawk plate and Beelzebub's memories, so he could somewhat get through, but the consumption was so huge that even with his body of laws, it was difficult to endure. What Leyland could not accept was that the soul force from foreign beings were very conspicuous and would be discovered no matter where one went. Hence, it was impossible to force his way in. If he could not force his way in, then he had to do something from the inside. Leyland's plan was to place a portion of his Trussel in the world of gods and become a half-independent clone that would grow in strength independently, without taking in any power from the main body. Once the clone grew to become a god, it would have enough power to coordinate with Leyland outside and open up the crystal wall of the world of gods. Arrangement in order for Leyland's plan to succeed, a clone was of utmost importance. Because he could not use his soul seed, it was necessary that he separated a part of his Trussel and give it enough authority to act independently. Leyland had already obtained the technique to split his Trussel from Melinda, and the method to control it had just been given by Ignox. Next is to fuse these two techniques and find out ways to reincarnate in another world. With the Manderhawk plate's ability, my clone will then secretly enter the world of gods. Since it will be an entirely independent body, my Trussel clone will also be considered a native of the world of gods and won't be monitored too closely, so I can quietly grow in strength. Even if I fail, I'll only lose a clone. If I luck out, I won't even need to take over the world of gods. As long as I fuse with that clone once more and absorb all the origin force of the world of gods from it, I'll gain immense benefits. Obviously, if I do succeed, then the whole world of gods shall be mine. Leyland's eyes burnt with fervor. Since he had his goal set now, he could begin the rest of the preparations. While a deep sleep lasted hundreds of years for some existences of laws, Leyland had a pile of things to take care of. On top of that, he had plans for his family and descendants. It did not take him too much time or effort to deal with these common things, but the sense of satisfaction they gave him made it all worth it. The entrance of the laboratory that had been silent for a long time revealed a dark path. The brass lampstand emitted a hazy luster, and the undying flames above it continued to emit bright, blazing flames and heat. With a lifespan of over 100,000 years, it feels like 100 years passed in the blink of an eye. Leyland looked grim as he walked out through the secret pathway and arriving at the outer world. On an afternoon in a castle, the warming rays of the winter sun shone down, creating a cozy feeling. There was even some snow on the peaks of a few hills surrounding the castle, while also having some life around. The place Leyland had exited from was the core area where security was at its strictest in the castle. In the castle, many high-ranked warlocks supervised and patrolled. The castle had an atmosphere of splendor and grandeur. Every underground patrolling warlock's eyes was filled with reverence towards the castle. What they were guarding was the most powerful monarch in the central continent, the pride of bloodline warlocks, the rank 6 warlock and the most powerful of the Ouroboros clan, Leyland Farlier, and this was his castle. Yes, this castle was the newly built core power of Leyland's power in the south coast, and the main camp of the whole Farlier family. The Targaryen castle is still the same as it was before, Leyland chuckled slightly, disappearing in midair and instantly arriving in the hall of the castle. Numerous ceremonial items began to shake and produce the most splendid music. The throne at the center began to release a black radiance, as if welcoming the arrival of an emperor. With a flash, Leyland sat on the throne, the upper part of the throne automatically curving to allow Leyland to sit very comfortably. Not bad. Leyland nodded, and then sensed an elated conscient in the hall. This belonged to the emotional undulations of the castle. With Leyland's ability, just the powerful radiation that he unwittingly gave off could, within a short period of time, completely modify the Targaryen castle. When he had first built it, Leyland had also intentionally vitalized the materials of the castle due to his radiation and modifications. The whole Targaryen castle had long since become a real ancient Magus castle that did not lose out to the famed ancient Magi castles in the central continent. It had even created a conscient of its own, serving under Leyland. The whole castle also had all sorts of mysterious abilities and powerful defenses. Without my approval, perhaps rank 5 or 6 Magi might find it difficult to just move around in here. Leyland was rather confident of this fact. Notify everyone that I'm here. Leyland patted the armrest of his seat. Clang, clang. At the heart of the Targaryen castle, atop a large black bell tower, a cumbersome brass carillon began to move even without wind, producing dull sounds that somehow seemed to penetrate through everything. The heavy carillon resounded in the whole castle, causing many warlocks to watch with their mouths wide open in shock. 9 times in a row, this signal. A newly advanced warlock looked stunned, as if he had seen something unthinkable. You're really lucky, kid, that you managed to witness the moment Lord Bloodline Monarch leaving his research. Beside him, his team leader had given him a ruthless shove to his chest, with some desolateness in his voice. It's a pity that the central meeting hall is not a place we can go to. Only the enforcers, housekeepers, and family of the Bloodline Monarch have the authority to enter. Enforcers? I'll reach that point someday. When that happens, I'll... The young warlock eyes seemed to be ablaze. Do your job well. The team leader patted his head and then laughed encouragingly. Clang, 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 clang. After the clanging of the bell, bundles of jade-green flames burnt within the discussion hall. Every once in a while, figures could be seen coming out from the flames, bowing to Leyland respectfully and then standing by their assigned seat, eyes full of fervor. Amongst them were obviously people who had yet to have the ability to shift locations easily. However, since this was the Targaryen castle, this sort of teleportation was not an issue, with Leyland personally allowing this, as well as help from the castle itself. Father! An even larger bundle of green flames burst into a blaze, revealing 2 warlocks' figures. The leading one was obviously Sire from before. He looked somewhat similar to Leyland, his long black hair and eyes full of a mysterious charm. The unique aura of warlocks hovered about him, giving him a deadly attractiveness. Standing beside Sire was Freya, dressed like an upper-class woman. Now, however, her eyes concealed some sort of grudge and bitterness. Freya, come! Leyland waved them over and got Freya to sit beside him, accepting the greetings from everyone else. He was actually aware of her unhappiness towards him. It was a pity that what Freya truly wanted was something Leyland could not give her. For Leyland, he could spend a bit more time to arrange things for the people or matters he knew well, but he could not keep staying by their sides. His gaze was always on the distance, attracted by the glamour of eternity. Before he reached his goal, Leyland would not halt his footsteps. However, Freya evidently loved him. She did not mind if Leyland played around outside indulging in sensual pleasures, but she was very dissatisfied with Leyland doing an experiment for a whole century. While she hid this sentiment, Leyland still realized it. It was a pity that it was impossible for Leyland to yield to her in this matter. He could only make it up to her with other methods. Perhaps, after truly gaining eternal life and freedom, would he then have the time to accompany her without restrictions? Now, under the steps were a large number of high-ranked warlocks aside from Sire. They were all Leyland's housekeepers and enforcers in the castle, and their eyes were filled with fervent zealousness. It was as if Leyland was a god in their eyes. After the burdensome etiquette was done with, Leyland asked a few questions, mostly regarding the latest news of the Ouroboros clan. After getting his answers, Leyland was now up to date with the development of the organization under him. The Ouroboros clan had long since gone through a complete transformation. With the limitless benefits from the underground trade, they not only had control of the South Control, but was also spreading towards their surrounding organizations. Even the branch in the central continent was working out well, its reputation there flourishing even more than it had been. The Farlier family made rapid progress. Sire and Daniel, the two second-generation descendants, had already grown, and there were even a surge of talents from the third and fourth-generation descendants. Of course, many of them were fervently being sought out by many bloodline nobility, and it was obvious they would find many troubles with this in the future. "Sire, you did very well with the underground trade," Leyland apathetically praised Sire as he watched the other warlocks below. "The reason I came out was to notify everyone that I intend to go through with experiments at an even deeper level. The next time we meet might be hundreds or even over 1,000 years later. In the time I'm not here, I will hand everything regarding the Ouroboros clan and Farlier family over to my wife and beloved son, Freya and Sire." The other high-ranked warlocks had long since gotten used to this sort of commands. After all, Leyland had done the same thing in the past and pushed the responsibility to others. This was just making things official. Meanwhile, Leyland's nonchalant attitude towards the hundreds of years that might pass gave rise to the envy of these warlocks. Experiments that would last for over 1,000 years. For warlocks like them, not getting past the hurdle of Morning Star meant they might not even live through one round of Leyland's experiments. Trussell splitting, "Father, you." After hearing Leyland's of intentions, Sire couldn't hold himself back even if the warlocks sitting below had no objections. At the same time, although her expression hadn't really changed, Freya was already tightly clasping her dress. Leyland noticed all of these minute movements. "Of course, before the experiment, I'll definitely make time to stay with you." Leyland glanced at Freya and consoled her. Meanwhile, his eyes scanned across those below him. "Everyone, please allow me some time to be with my family." Since Leyland had spoken, the high-ranked warlocks naturally did not say more and bid farewell, leaving the space to the family of three with the highest authority. "I'm sorry, Freya, but there's a reason I have to do this." Leyland watched his wife apologetically. "I promise, this temporary parting is all preparation for us to be together for eternity. Please believe in me." Freya's eyes reddened, and Sire scratched his head. "All right, let's not talk about stuff that will dampen our moods. Send the order for a banquet to be prepared. I'll spend good time with you for now." Leyland watched Sire tenderly and smiled. Several months had already passed by the time Leyland had returned to his laboratory once more. At the thought of how he'd been rushing everywhere for these months, even Leyland could only rub his nose and laugh wryly. There was not just Freya and Sire in his family. Whether it was Selene and his son in Twilight Zone, Belinda, her sister and Ignis in the underground Alabaster City, and the rest who had had intimate relations with him, all needed to be pacified. While the time he spent with each of them was short, the amount of time it added up to came to a terrifying amount. Of course, with Leyland's personality, he only spent more effort appeasing Freya and a few others. The rest of the women were consoled with just some transmissions. After all, Leyland clearly knew which women held more importance to him. Besides taking care of those affairs, there was also the development of the Ouroboros clan and the Farlier family. Leyland merely set a rather approximate aim when it came to this and got his subordinates to do the rest. With Sire and Daniel, the two rank 6s in charge, there was little he needed to worry about. Next is to vigorously do research on reincarnation techniques and do all I can to make a strategy for the world of gods. Leyland's eyes displayed his anticipation as he immersed himself in experiments and research. Time flowed like water, and the years passed by in a blur. Things of the world outside his words seemed to lose all importance to Leyland, who'd sunk into experiments and getting proof. In his mind, the Trussell splitting technique he had gained from Melinda, the method to maintain control over a Trussell clone that he had obtained from Ignox, and many other techniques were already being broken up and reorganized to form an even more complex and profound body. The mysteries of the Trussell began to unveil itself before Leyland. allowing Leyland to touch on the truth of the world on a deeper level. Universe and true-soul, macroscopic and microscopic, matter and conscient. At the very heart of it, everything mysteriously has its similarities. Is this the secret of the universe? Leyland looked intoxicated. In front of him, dazzling starlight fused into one body, yet its form seemed to be constantly changing. From the outside, it seemed to be an irregular spheroid formed of starlight. There were scenes of the explosion of the universe and shrinking of the black hole, which then gradually formed into a human figure. Beep. Completion of rank 7 spell, alternative world reincarnation. Referenced material. Soul-splitting technique. How to control your soul in Oja. Exploring the mysteries of the world. True soul concealment basics for devils. The AI chip's prompt sounded, followed by an even more detailed introduction to the spell. Alternate world reincarnation. Rank 7 spell. Ability to split the true soul of the main body and project the body to another world to be reincarnated. The main body will have absolute control over the true soul clone and synchronize completely with the world origin force's frequency, getting treatment as a native would. In the Magus world's history, there were few rank 7 spells and much less spell models to record them. This was because the existences of laws, after reaching rank 7, could make use magic at its source and bypass the process of using the spell model. Besides, spells at rank 7 and above usually needed the corresponding power of laws as the basis, and had no properties that allowed it to be used widespread. The spell formation that Leyland had specially developed was much different from the original soul-splitting technique. It can be said that this alternate world reincarnation is actually a new method of traversing to another world. If used on an ordinary person, it would still have the same effect. Leyland's lips quirked up into a smile. His rank 7 spell not only made use of the intelligence of Melinda and Ignox, but also included what he felt was important. Amongst this was the AI chip simulation analytical skills, as well as the transformation by the world origin will. In his reincarnation spell, the true soul had to go through a transformation by the world origin force. Hence, the clone that successfully descended into the world of gods would be no different from a native, and even gods would not notice. Only with these would his clone have enough space and time to develop. Of course, because the clone had abandoned all its original abilities and lacked any power from the main body, the clone would start off in the weakest state. However, with Leyland's true soul memories, the clone would definitely grow quickly and then begin to spy on the domains of the gods. It was only after reaching the realm of the gods and synchronizing with the world origin force that the clone would possibly coordinate with the main body in order to break through the barrier of the crystal wall. The theoretical and practical experiments for these have been completed. What's next is to put everything into practice. Leyland looked very grim. Neither the splitting of his true soul and reincarnating it in the world of gods were simple tasks. Even with Leyland's semi-rank 7 body of laws, he had to treat this very seriously. So I've finally reached this point? Leyland's eyes were filled with emotion. All his memories flashed before his eyes, from starting off as an ordinary little noble that developed into a being filled with fear in the Magus world, to his memories of glory and splendor afterwards. Leyland's mind lingered with the mysteries and vastness of magic, the glory and mystery of the world of gods, as well as the limitless strength system and the supreme truth. Now, he was completely giving up the path the ancient Magi had walked, entering the world of gods in order to search for the origin or to meet his end. The slight wavering in his emotions was suppressed by him in the blink of an eye. Soon, his eyes went back to a state that was impervious to desires and passions. Leyland arrived in the astral laboratory. Here, an astral gate exactly the same as before had been rebuilt. The large stone gates and the strange, simple patterns seemed to be narrating some ancient and great history. Manderhawk plate! Leyland's right hand flickered with light, and a round stone plate appeared. There was even a large part missing at its edge, as if something had taken a bite out of it. Based on the data from the previous experiment, I've modified it further and made an imitation Manderhawk plate with the addition of some other materials. Leyland's eyes flashed as the AI chip's robotic voice sounded. Manderhawk plate imitation. Wait, 2451G effect. Weaken world force makes it convenient for transmission of energy. This is an imitation, made from the Manderhawk plate Beelzebub possesses. holds 46.5% of power of the original. Maker, Leyland Farlier. Compared to the previous inferior versions which only had 20–30% the effects of the original, this imitation is evidently more powerful. It should help the plan work more smoothly. Leyland touched his chin, suddenly looking resolute. Let's begin. Rumble. A dazzling golden, blazing sun slowly appeared from behind him. This was a projection of Leyland's Trussel, representing a peak rank 6 Warlock. This was the strength of the highest quality soul. The golden soul flames that appeared physical wreaked havoc in the laboratory. Besides the astral gate, everything was incinerated into nothing. First up, the splitting of the Trussel. Leyland looked incomparably grave. Based on the technique to split the Trussel into two, a powerful tearing force entered his point mass. At the heart of the point mass, which was where a Magus, soul and strength gathered, the peak rank 6 Trussel began to tremble abruptly. Pain. The intense pain of tearing one's soul apart. Leyland bore the sudden attack, which made him turn pale with cold sweat running down profusely. At his back, his blazing sun Trussel quivered, and even the Targaryen appeared, producing hisses of misery and suffering. Ha! Split! Leyland looked extremely malicious, as if a devil from hell. With his yell, a white streak of electricity fell, striking the figure behind him. Crash. The golden sun split in an instant, forming two Trussels, one larger than the other. Ah! At the moment his Trussel was split, Leyland's mind went completely blank, and his eyes were filled with confusion. Such weakness! Once he completely regained his senses, he forced a smile as he sensed the terrifying injuries to his Trussel. Just breaking off a small part of my Trussel is already so terrifying. Leyland gazed at the two irregular Trussels. While they had both turned into flaming suns, the physically larger one was obviously tens of times bigger than the smaller Trussel. Alternate world reincarnation, injuries to the Trussel, are the most terrifying. Even existences of laws will sink into a deep sleep in order to heal them. Leyland laughed wryly. This is a result of splitting a small part of my Trussel. If it's anything like what Beelzebub did, it's very possible that my main body would just die. The phantom Targaryen behind Leyland's back withered and slowly disappeared. A bit of faint red light flew out from between his brows and disappeared into his hand, flashing like a firefly. This was the smaller Trussel that Leyland had split. The experiment had to begin immediately, lest it dissipate from prolonged exposure to the external world. Astral gate, open, Leyland huffed in a low voice, and a procedure identical to before was executed. His soul force waded through the long astral river until it arrived at the tremendous crystal wall surrounding the world of gods. Manderhawk S plate. The stone plate in Leyland's hands came to the crystal wall, emitting a light that caused a portion to seem to be on the verge of melting. At the moment, a channel opened through the crystal wall. Leyland's eyes brightened and immense rank 7 spell undulations were emitted from his body. Rank 7 spell alternate world reincarnation. Time seemed to stop in that instant. That bit of Trussel in Leyland's hands was enveloped in the brilliance of the alternate world reincarnation spell as it disappeared into the world of gods. Everything happened quickly. Once it was done, the Manderhawk plate exploded into powder, and the crystal wall from before closed itself quickly with no trace of a flaw. It's all up to the Trussel now. The huge astral gate gradually collapsed, and Leyland could only smile wryly. With his serious injuries, he could only slumber in his laboratory, recuperating with time as he controlled his clone in the world of gods. These injuries are enough for me to sleep for a few hundred years. If I don't get any benefits from the world of gods, it would be such a huge loss. With this thought, Leyland's body disappeared into the ground under the laboratory. With the slumber of his main body, all of his attention was focused on that clone. The brainwashing and refining from a world origin was a very terrifying process. Leyland's Trussel could sense that ever since he entered the world of gods, terrifying energy whirlpools had formed next to him, tirelessly washing away all traces of the power he used to possess. Evidently, this was an effect of the rank 7 spell, alternate world reincarnation. It allowed Leyland to reach the core of the world of gods and be altered by the origin itself. Once this modification was over, he could perhaps wash off all traces of being from another world and truly become a native of the world of gods. This alteration happened extremely quickly. The luster of the Manderhawk plate had diminished by a huge degree, after opening just the external layer of the crystal wall. And after opening up the world of gods, it had been directly destroyed with no traces of it left at all. Next was the power of the rank 7 spell, the reincarnation spell that allowed Leyland to arrive in this world. Its luster gradually dissipated. Just like stripping off a greatcoat, once the rays of light of the reincarnation spell dissipated, Leyland's true soul was fully bared in the immense darkness. Vastness, terror, boundlessness. This was Leyland's true soul's first thoughts. Compared to this enormous world, his little true soul was nothing and couldn't even be compared to an ant, and it could only tremble in the corner. The unpowerful source immediately invaded into Leyland's true soul. The true soul, which had already been shrunk and condensed to a large degree, surprisingly gradually became slower under the alteration of the world force. Even soul force has been forcefully removed. Leyland's true soul watched this process, able to only laugh. The true soul was constantly altered, to the point that Leyland's own conscience was gradually becoming fuzzy. Gradually, the changes from the world force went on to the deepest layer of his true soul, where his memories and his most important elements of self were. The tremendous soul force ruthlessly invaded it with no intentions of stopping. Could it be that I'm going to be defeated just like this, with such a laughable method? Leyland's true soul was on the verge of death, and only this little thought appeared tenaciously, as if making its last struggle. BZZT, BZZT. At this moment, a bright silver-white light shone from Leyland's true soul memories. Under the influence of the white rays of light, the world force hesitated for that slight moment, and then let go of Leyland's memories, altering other areas. Could this be the power of the alternate world reincarnation spell? So it still has a bit of energy left, stored in my memories, or it's something else. Leyland's true soul was perplexed, but having been diminished to the limit, quickly sank into a deep sleep. Time seemed to stop at this moment, but at the same time, a long time seemed to have passed. Where is this? Leyland, who regained his consciousness, sized up his surroundings, stunned. Perhaps sizing up wasn't the right term for it because he no longer had a body and naturally had no eyes or organs like that. What he was now doing was using his senses to explore the area like feelers. Darkness. It was darkness all around with no light at all. Leyland, who was now conscious, measured up his surroundings and felt helpless. Even my true soul has vanished. I'm just a body that's a mixture of memories and a fragmented soul now. Leyland's conscient was suddenly enlightened. At this moment, there seemed to be a black hole in the air that sucked his conscient in. Leyland's conscient found itself getting dizzy as it sunk into a deep sleep. How long have I slept for? When his conscient reawakened, the surroundings had changed once again. While it was darkness all around, orange red light could be seen. He could even hear some low hums in his confusion. Thankfully, while his conscient was weak, Leyland could tell that his conscient was no longer without a source, but had something maintaining his life. In this state, what I need is to do what I can to reduce consumption of energy and allow the conscient to rest in order to amass more energy. Leyland's conscient sank into sleep once more. However, before going back into a slumber, Leyland gave himself a prompt. The terrifying calculation abilities of his main body now became the most precise stopwatch. Once it reached 17,280 in his mind, Leyland reawakened. 17,280 seconds, which is 200 days have passed. Awake, the conscient was elated to find that it had gotten stronger. There was the obvious feeling of energy being transmitted, as if there was a warm rush unceasingly pouring towards his stomach. Stomach, An electrostatic force swept across him, and immediately after, Leyland felt his right leg twitch. His conscient abruptly became clear as he then went through a more detailed probe. Thanks to this slumber, the area that he could explore expanded, gradually forming the image of a baby hugging his head. The veins and even bones could be seen. I have a body now, so what happened was that I've always been in a pregnant woman's stomach as an embryo. Leyland abruptly understood. So it seems like the alternate world reincarnation spell formation succeeded. However, Leyland soon found himself at a loss. Do I have to start off as a baby? This is simply too shameful. However, with Leyland's thick skin, this embarrassment only had him turn red for a moment, before he began to consider this situation as if nothing had happened. A baby is far too weak. With my current state, my parents should be regular human natives of the world of gods. It's a pity that in this situation, I have no way to protect myself. I can only leave everything up to fate. All the previous energy he possessed had been washed off and removed from him. Even the soul energy that Magi were the most proud of had completely disappeared. Besides a bit of awareness, he was no different from other unborn children and naturally had no way to protect himself. In addition, just thinking for this moment left Leyland feeling dizzy. This isn't good. A baby's brain has yet to fully mature. In this state, I should try my best to withhold my thoughts. It's better to sleep. Leyland understood everything. Conscience cannot exist without a body. This was even more so in the world of gods, where laws were even more stern. Leyland now had lost all his solidified soul energy. His conscient and spiritual force could only rely on this developing body of a fetus, and he naturally could not overdo it. If the woman were to have a miscarriage because of this, Leyland would be doomed. Leyland, who understood this well, could only sink into a deep slumber while hoping this pregnant woman would be safe. Ugh! At this moment in a port city in the world of gods, a noble young lady clutched at her swelling stomach, brows tightly furrowed. "What is it, darling?" A young man immediately came over to help her along, looking anxious. "It's the child. He kicked me." The woman looked gentle, brimming in the radiance of motherly love. "What a cheeky fellow." The young lad bent down, pressing his ear tightly to the swollen stomach, to which the lady protested coquettishly. Birth waiting was always boring and painful, especially when one's safety was entrusted to someone else. Thankfully, this torture was about to end. Through his own senses, as well as the information he'd obtained from the outside world, Leyland knew he would be born soon. He'd even felt the invasion of an extraordinary energy during the long pregnancy. It was a pure white positive energy, used to heal and increase vitality. Having experienced it several times, Leyland quickly understood what it was. The blessings of a priest. Great! This blessing was very beneficial for the development of fetuses, and Leyland naturally accepted it without restraint. What made him even more satisfied was that a family who could afford to call for the blessing of a priest several times would not be ordinary. He was starting in a better environment, so the chances of a successful birth were much higher. With a good background, he could even have a better life. After all, the chances that those with high social status got were always greater than what peasants came across. This established trend would never be overturned. Just as Leyland was pondering over this, he felt the placenta around him tearing, and a terrible odor filled his sense of smell. Meanwhile, in the master's bedroom at the very center of a vast manor, the piercing screams of a woman sounded with many panicked voices. "Oh, HES coming out." A nobleman was pacing around on a bright velvet carpet, clenching his fingers so tightly that they had turned pale with stress. "Don't worry, he's been blessed by the gods, so he will definitely be born safely." A priest in a white gown consoled him in a gentle voice. On his sleeves were several shining threads of gold, and he had a unique emblem on his chest. The emblem looked like a thick tome with some mysterious runes on it. The priest was evidently the bishop of the region, loyal to the god of knowledge. His presence wasn't necessary given his status, but this was a family of devout believers of Aguma. They were also his primary supporters in the region, so he'd ended up coming for the birth of their descendant. "Thank you so much, Bishop Tapris. The fallen family will forever remember and abide by the teachings of the God of knowledge." The young man did all he could to suppress the anxiety in his expression. WAH. At this moment, a resonant cry could be heard from the bedroom, causing him to freeze. Immediately after, numerous maids and a wet nurse came to congratulate him. "She's given birth. She's given birth. It's a healthy young master." "Really? Let me see him." The young man's expression was filled with fervor as he took the baby over from the nurse. There were signs of the umbilical cord being cut off on the stomach, but his limbs were thick and sturdy. His blue eyes were as deep as the ocean, and it was especially moving that he was a new life. Meanwhile, the baby was wailing and bawling away, and the young man was left at a loss. "What a strong child! God shall bless you." Tapris had a kind smile on his face, and white light tenderly caressed the child's head. The divine force placated the baby, causing him to fall asleep. "Please allow me to donate 100 gold coins to the church to show my humble respect." The young man told Bishop Tapris, and these words immediately caused him to freeze before the smile on his face widened. "God definitely knows of your goodwill. I will personally pray for the baby as well." This bishop had originally intended to take charge of the baptism and even become the godfather of the baby to further deepen his relationship with the fallen family. Now, though, 100 gold coins didn't seem half bad, since it was a huge amount of money. Nobles are all sly and greedy. They definitely won't close off all the escape routes they have. Tapris suddenly recalled the education he'd received and watched the young man meaningfully, but he did not get angry. After all, ever since he had dedicated the rest of his life to the mighty Aguma, rage and the like had grown rare. The mighty god of knowledge taught his followers and priests to always remain rational, and fury was the biggest enemy of rationality. Hence, Tapris seemed rather elegant as he chatted with the young man before hinting that he was going to leave. Before that, the bishop seemed to remember something. "Oh yes, I've yet to ask the young master's name." "Leyland Fallen, this is the name his mother picked for him," the young man exclaimed excitedly. "Leyland, that's a good name." The bishop gracefully bade them farewell and left. The young man impatiently entered the labor room, comforting his exhausted wife. However, none of them noticed that the baby who was sleeping peacefully in the cradle opened its eyes for an instant. Its eyes were full of glee before it closed them once more. Such emotions were an extreme thing for a newborn. Leyland was exclaiming inwardly, "World of gods, here I come." Leyland was rather satisfied that his name remained the same in this world. It had been intentional. He'd hinted it to his mother from time to time as a fetus in her body. "So this is my family in this world. I seem to have a good background." Leyland had seen most of his surroundings in that glimpse. The valuable velvet carpet, the silver crystal chandelier, the soft red brocade duvet, the large curtains embroidered with green daffodils, and lastly the numerous respectful maids and the wet nurse made it clear that Leyland was at least a minor noble in this world, or perhaps one with an even higher status. After all, not every noble child's birth would warrant the visit and protection of the regional bishop. The birth was followed by a clamor. His father here was now receiving the friends and family who had come to congratulate them. His mother beside him was already deeply asleep, while Leyland appeared to be the same. Inside, however, he was getting excited. Leyland took in a deep breath. "AI chip!" Beep. "Authorization to unlock seal has been obtained. Beginning activation procedures." Familiar robotic sounds could be heard, and immediately after numerous blue virtual lines were projected before Leyland's eyes. As expected, the AI chip's here as well. Leyland's eyes were filled with ecstasy. The AI chip had already been fused with his soul, and the true soul that had been split naturally carried a portion of the AI chip's abilities. No, only a subroutine of the AI chip has been separated. Still, even just that possesses a large portion of its abilities. Leyland was very excited. With his extraordinary knowledge, he could definitely rise up quickly in the world of gods even if he started off with nothing. With the AI chip's powerful storage system and analytical abilities, Leyland could not begin to imagine the great life he would soon have. It's a pity. This is the world of gods, and the influence of gods permeates every single aspect. I can't be too outstanding. For now, it's necessary to act like all other babies. Otherwise, I'd get suspected or even treated as a foreign force or a being possessed by a devil. Leyland was grim. Gods treated the purity of noble bloodlines as an important thing. The bishop that had come today wasn't just a nanny. At the very least, Leyland found many traces of magic in the room, such as detection of evil and soul defense. If not for using the rank 7 alternate world reincarnation spell and been baptized by the world of God's origin, his soul no different from the other natives, he would long since have been discovered. When the time came, even his identity as a noble would not save him. Of course, there are also disadvantages of being a native. My strength has been completely removed. Everything is blank right now. I can't even begin to train yet, and I'll have to climb up through the strength system of this world. With the baptism by the world origin force, all traces of Leyland being a Magus had been wiped. Besides his memories and the AI chip, he was no different from a baby here. Most importantly, even though he had numerous high-grade meditation techniques, he could use none of them at all. Those were the paths of Magi, and even if Leyland were to gather spiritual force using those meditation techniques, the gods of this world would soon sense the foreign force. This body would suffer the same fate as his soul seed, but there must be a way to use spiritual force in the world of gods. There's no need to hurry. I just need to grow slowly, and I'm bound to find it someday, Leyland consoled himself. At this moment, the AI chip completed its first scan. Beep. Scanning of surrounding humans complete. Establishing database regarding races in the world of gods. All right then. Set up my statistics with the average humans of this world. Leyland instructed. Neither his original standard of measurement nor the standards of the heavenly astral race fit into this context. The former was too low, while the latter started at Morning Star, which was too powerful. He needed to set up a new standard of measurement. Beep. Mission established. Scanning host stats. Beginning generation of database. The AI chip loyally followed Leyland's commands. Soon enough, a 3D image of a body appeared in front of Leyland, with concrete information next to it. The Fallen family. Leyland Fallen, strength, 0.2, agility, 0.1, vitality, 0.3, spiritual force, 0.7, condition, healthy. The AI chip projected Leyland's current data in a small blue font next to the image in the database. It was a tragic sight. All right, except for spiritual force, which is closer to that of an adult because of the memories I've retained, the rest are standard stats for an infant. Leyland was rather embarrassed. He was currently more weak than when he'd first crossed over into the Magus world. However, the standards of the adults here are different from those of the Magus world. They can't be compared. Leyland understood the new criteria that the AI chip had adopted. The current statistical units represented the standard of the commoners of the world of gods. As the laws were more rigid in the world of gods, there were even changes in the physical constants of the world. It was thus perfectly normal for the average stats here to be greater than in the Magus world. At this moment, the AI chip's voice sounded once more. Beep. Unknown energy source has been discovered. Radiation is determined to have a beneficial effect on the host's body. Leyland identified the location of the problem discovered by the AI chip and saw a milky white brilliance within his lower abdomen which was continuously spreading outwards. This is the divine force of the bishop from earlier. Leyland was very certain about this. What effect does this radiation have? The AI chip quickly gave an answer. Radiation appears to be in a state of weak radioactive decay, estimated to completely dissipate in 279 hours, and at the same time increase the host body's strength by 0.1, agility by 0.1, and vitality by 0.2. Is this the blessing of a god? Leyland laughed sarcastically, a privilege that only the strong get. Of course, Leyland recognized that this was indeed a privilege. With these blessings, his growth would definitely surpass his peers. He would also possess greater strength and a more well-built physique when he grew older. The disparity between classes is set from birth. The difference in the starting lines mean that the children born of the commoners are destined to be unable to match up to the children born of nobility, favored by the gods. Even if they put in 100 times more blood, sweat, and tears, and get a little lucky, perhaps all they can see are the backs of those noble children. Although Leyland was confident in eventually reaching the peak even if he started off as a lowly commoner, he obviously wouldn't reject a higher social position. Where's the baby? I want to see my cousin. Clang. The door to the room was pushed open even as a tender and lovely voice sounded. The person speaking evidently wasn't very old, talking in a childish manner. The other maid seemed to recognize the source of the voice and allowed her to lean against the side of Leyland's cradle. Oh, he's awake, the little girl cried out in surprise. Is this a relative? Leyland opened his eyes unhappily and sized up this reckless person who interrupted his train of thought. The girl had azure pupils like him. Strands of her silky gold hair caressed her fair and delicate forehead, lending a delicate charm to it. Her beautiful small nose was raised up slightly, and below it was a little mouth which revealed her cute canines as she smiled. There were also 2 tiny dimples, one on each side of her cheeks. Isabel, you're disturbing him. The voices of the other adults could be heard at this moment, accompanied by footsteps. The little girl was pulled to the side, and the occasional discontented voice sounded out from her. Isabel, eh? What an energetic little brat. He sensed great trouble from those inquisitive eyes. She clearly had great interest in him. He predicted that this elder cousin wouldn't let him have peace. What drove Leyland a little mad that he had absolutely no power whatsoever to resist her right now. Dear God, please send that Isabel back home right away. It's best if it's on the other end of the continent. He started to pray piously. Such a pity, the world didn't seem to hear his prayers. Soon after, his elder cousin Isabel decided to stay in his family's manor. Apparently, this young lady would be staying with the fallen family for a long period of time. Leyland's next few days were extremely tough. He could still tolerate her squishing his cheeks or smothering his face with cream, but the most serious of all was that this female cousin actually tried to imitate the adults by changing his diapers. Oh goodness. It was already shameful enough to be fiddled with like a baby after reincarnation, and now his elder cousin, who was still a young girl, wanted to change his diapers. Dear God! Leyland really had an urge to kill himself right there and then. If only the gods knew of their plight in the future, they would definitely show their strong support and approve of this decision. Unfortunately, there was no such thing as if only in this world. With Leyland's bottom line and character, these were just trivial matters. After simply blushing in embarrassment a few times, he no longer had as many mood swings. He even quickly discovered the ultimate trick to deal with Isabel. It was crying, loud, relentless crying. In any case, he was a young baby, and it couldn't be more normal to wail when he was bullied. Once he did, either his mother or some servant or maid would come to his rescue. They even firmly reprimanded the girl at times, which made him feel inexplicably carefree. After a few such incidents, Isabel didn't dare to do anything unusual that would make Leyland unhappy. She even seemed to be a little afraid of him, which pleased him greatly. It also had to be said that, in certain aspects, Leyland's strong character made one's hair stand on end. These awkward incidents of life were just trifling matters. Thanks to his identity as a baby, many adults didn't intentionally stay away from him when they discussed matters. Who could guess that a child just a few months old would have the ability to remember anything? Leyland thus managed to gather a lot of intel. With the AI chip's valiant ability of gathering information, and the things the subordinates and servants unintentionally revealed as they chatted, his understanding of the family quickly surpassed that of most others. He even learnt many secrets of theirs. After all, being able to gossip about their masters without worry while they were not around was practically instinctive to those servants. On top of that, Leyland was still an infant, and they wouldn't avoid him. Yet, they would never have imagined that their little master already had a will, and even remembered every single thing that they said clearly. Although the majority of the things these subordinates discussed were very vulgar and were accompanied by exaggerated imagination, Leyland soon managed to gain a profound understanding of his own family, and even used the AI chip to produce a family tree. First off would be his father, the Baron of the kingdom. Jonah's fallen's father had great military accomplishments. Because of his inheritance, he'd obtained some feudal land, becoming a rising nobleman in the kingdom. He had a few younger siblings, and they formed the current line of descent for the fallen family. His mother, Sarah, was a gentle and benevolent upper-class woman. As a noble family in military service, they'd had to go through an extremely wretched process to obtain a fief. There was nothing that could be done about it. Leyland's respected paternal grandfather seemed to have been the head imperial bodyguard of the kingdom. He was on friendly terms with the previous prince, who was also the current king. In the wars that followed, there were a few times when his grandfather almost lost his life, and he ended up with a body full of injuries that couldn't be cured fully even by divine spells. Only then had he barely managed to seize the opportunity to develop the kingdom's territory and became a noble landowner. He was then conferred the title of Baron and breathed his last not long after. And that was exactly where Leyland's manor was. Speaking of which, his father Jonas was actually a highly accomplished leader. Upon arriving at his feudal property, not only did he actively open up new lands for agriculture, expand production processes, and breed numerous kinds of cash crops, but he also established a decent port on a remote island. Through providing potable water, food, and maintenance services for boats that passed, it had slowly developed. They had managed to resist a few pirate attacks, causing them to retreat. Now, the fallen leadership had already undergone earth-shattering changes as compared to before. Their land was acclaimed as the jewel off the coast of the kingdom, and it certainly led to veteran nobilities lusting after it. However, all of this was still within the range of Jonah's capabilities. At least there weren't any intense conflicts at present, which made Leyland heave a sigh of relief. Isabel was also living in the manor with the family of 3. Her parents seemed to have forgotten about her after throwing her here, and she herself seemed to be indulging in too much pleasure to care about her home. Apart from Isabel, the entire manor was filled with servants of the fallen family. The gray-haired butler Ryan had the highest status, and there were also a large bunch of kitchen ladies, maids, servants, apprentice knights, and the like present. The fallen family's feudal lands were really huge. There was an independent farm, mill, stable, workshop, vegetable oil extraction factory, and other facilities. There were even entire plots of fertile farmland that employed farmers, both male and female. The entire manor was able to supply flour, vinegar, wine, and similar items in large quantities, as well as iron farm tools in smaller amounts. Even if they closed their doors to the outside world, they would still be self-sufficient for a very long period of time. Leyland viewed it as the typical economic situation of a feudal villa. Due to the fallen family's short history, they still didn't have the financial ability and physical resources to build their own castle. In actual fact, constructing a castle required the consumption of vast quantities of stone and food, and even the assistance of priests and numerous extraordinary beings. Even ancient noble families often did not have the money to finance a castle. Of course, once construction was complete, it would be the pride and symbol of the family. The defensive abilities of castles belonging to noblemen in the world of gods were top-notch. The castles were protected by spell formations, and even military troops wouldn't be able to bring it down in a short span of time. When interacting within the circle of nobility, one would often feel as though he was shorter than others by a head without a castle of their own.